Watch this.
Growth should pay for itself. How many times you heard that in Idaho? Well, lately, money coming in from many cities hasn't been able to keep up with the people coming in. But Star seems to have figured out a solution. Garden City has certainly been going through a rebirth, attracting artists and residents and artists in residence. Today, the addition of a new studio that will highlight dance, music, and movies. You can't seem to have a team without a mascot, right? But it seems you can have a mascot without a team? Boise never fielded the Fighting Bobs, but it once had a Fighting Bob. We'll explain. It has been well documented. Idaho continues to be one of the fastest growing states in the country. Traffic and housing prices should tell you that. But this isn't the first time we've seen significant swelling of Idaho's population. The Gem State is currently seeing the dust settle on a 3-year increase of 6.2% from 2020 to 2023. We went from 1.85 million people to 1.96 million, which is only about a 2% increase per year. But between 1900 and 1930, we were seeing nearly 10,000 people a year move into Idaho, almost a 6% increase year over year. Things settled down from there with the annual growth rate hovering around 2 to 3%. But a 2% increase these days is a lot more people than it was, well, last century. Instead of 300,000 over 30 years, we've seen more than 115,000 people move into Idaho in just 3 years. And a good chunk of them have found a new home in the Treasure Valley, leaving most once small towns wrestling with the question of how do we pay for the infrastructure changes? Things like roads, emergency services, utilities, and of course, schools, which led to Rick sending us this question about CUNA asking for funding to pay for new and improved schools. Rick said, "Here we go again. Growth does not pay for itself. Charge an impact fee that really covers the services new growth requires." You know, he makes a good point, but let's set schools aside for just a moment. Impact fees are something most cities charge developers who put in new neighborhoods and shopping centers. And they certainly help cover the cost of police and fire, new roads or new city parks in and around those newly developed areas. For example, in Nampa, the impact fees for a single home is nearly $8,200. In Boise, depending on where in the city you build and how big you want to build that house, you're looking at $1,300 to $15,000. It's cheaper by the airport, by the way. City of Star is doing the same thing, but they have also something they call mitigation fees. The mayor says they're the only city in Idaho to charge them. And as Hunter Funk found out, it's keeping them debt-free with no bonds.
1905, the city of Star was an incorporated and established city. But after a decline in population when the Boise and Interurban Railway closed in 1928, it took until December 10, 1997, to get back to being an incorporated city. At that point, the population was a whopping 500 people. And it's clear, like many Idaho towns, it was not expected that there would be such a dramatic population boom. Looking back to 2015, there were more than 7,900 people in Star. In 2020, the census shows the population grew more than 40% with more than 11,000 people. And in 2024, the mayor says Star's expected to grow by another 83% with 20,370 people. Keeping up with that growth and upgrading the infrastructure is what has Star getting creative.
Growth is paying for growth in our community.
Mayor Trevor Chadwick, in his State of the City, says Star's similar to neighboring cities. For any new building that goes up in the city, there are impact fees. To build a single-family home, there is a $3,493 fee that goes towards roads, a fee of $2,152 that goes towards firefighting equipment and fire stations, and a parks fee of $2,050. That's nearly $8,000, similar to Nampa. But wait, that's not all.
So what we have done is we have gone and instituted mitigation fees in the development world. For every new house that's built in the city of Star, pays a fee that helps fund our police specifically. And that's something unique. No other city's doing that here in the state of Idaho right now. This is something that we're kind of been innovative on.
100% of Star's property tax budget goes to policing. But because that can't cover all of the needs, they have mitigation fees to increase funding for public safety, going to police and fire personnel. Together, this is an additional $6,960 for new builds. That brings the grand total to build a home to more than $14,600. Since 2022, the city's collected $1.7 million in mitigation fees.
Everybody doesn't like growth, but you got to have a plan for that growth.
Mayor Chadwick says it's keeping their taxes lower than other cities, and right now it's working. There is still more work to be done to keep up with the demand, specifically for schools. The mayor says Starr is actively advocating to the legislature to let them collect more impact fees to pay for the construction of new schools. And the mayor says they are trying to get more commercial property as well to alleviate taxes on residents. He mentioned at least 15 new businesses are in the planning or construction phases right now.
I guess the question is, so these mitigation fees, if they're the only state or city in Idaho doing this, I assume that will start to kind of take off and get some, I don't know, I guess some power behind it with more cities doing it.
I mean, I could definitely see that. You know, when you're looking at just new builds, yeah, it's not very great if you're building something, but in the same sense, I mean, that's a great way to keep providing for that growth. If you're coming into the community, you got to help with the infrastructure.
And it helps to be a desirable spot like Starr. If you're not, then builders are probably like, well, we'll just go somewhere else and look for cheaper places to build.
Kind of like Boise, you know, you look at the different spots on how much you have to pay.
Yeah.
The more desirable spots, the higher the price.
Yeah. You mentioned schools and the legislature there at the end of your story. So let's go back to Rick's text message about impact fees in schools. Rick isn't the only one who thinks the cost of construction should cover the cost of new schools. In covering the frequent levies and bonds being asked by area school districts, several of you have asked a similar question to this, like Ann or Barb in Boise. Charge builders impact fees to pay for schools' upkeep. Some states call it a bedroom tax. She said, if we had that, we wouldn't need levies, says Barb. And Ken in Greenleaf agrees. If our representatives would just allow impact fees, the need for bonds would be reduced. And that's kind of the catch here. Idaho does allow for impact fees, as we just learned, to pay for infrastructure like water, sewer lines, roads and storm drains, parks and public safety, but not schools. In fact, only about a dozen states allow impact fees to go toward local school districts, and Idaho is not one of them. Not that it hasn't been tried. Back in 2019, CUNA School District trustees put together a resolution to try to bring it to lawmakers to change state code to allow for it. Well, that resolution went nowhere at the State House. That year, though, lawmakers, they were successful in removing public charter schools from being able to benefit from impact fees, put them on the same ground level as regular public schools. And then in 2023, just 2 years ago, or I guess a year and a half ago, there were several attempts to add schools to the list of impact fee recipients. But none of those bills made it out of committee. So Idaho remains one of the dozen to not fund schools with developmental impact fees. You know, Garden City is one of those Treasure Valley cities getting some attention from developers, but it's been in the spotlight for artists for a bit longer. Today, the city, nestled by the river, is joining those two things with the opening of a $2 million creative studio. LED, a nonprofit with a focus on dance, music, and film, is finally getting a permanent home after 10 years of relying on temporary spaces. And like a lot of locations in Garden City, they're turning an old industrial space into a new, innovative space. Today, LED held a quasi-groundbreaking, and Aspen Shumpert stopped by to see their first steps and see what they have choreographed for the future.
Right now, it doesn't look like much more than an empty building in Garden City. But a local nonprofit has plans to give it some rhythm. Today, supporters of the dance company, LED, got a chance to celebrate the beginning.
We are just so thrilled
of a $2 million project coming its way.
This will become an anchor in this community.
This white building will soon be a new stage for the arts.
We have a community that loves what we do and I think is hungry for something that's different.
LED, a local nonprofit, combines dance and art for a non-traditional experience.
Sometimes they're in a theater, sometimes they're on the street, sometimes they're collaborating with a restaurant.
And their new home will be more than just a studio.
We had a space on Grove Street, Grove and 15th, for the last 5 years, and we loved that little studio. But I think that it feels like the natural evolution at this point is for us to have a place that we can really build every aspect of the work and be also a resource to artists.
All under one roof will be a space for rehearsals and gatherings. The theater will be able to hold up to 150 people for performances. Whether it's dance or a night out for a comedy show, she says It's a one-of-a-kind space.
There isn't a space like this that exists. There isn't a venue like this that exists, and we really believe that it's going to be a huge asset.
LED will be a piece of the fastest growing areas in Garden City.
The area that it's located in here really has developed over the last 7, 8, 9 years into a center where there's arts, and of course we've got our wineries and breweries that have flourished down here.
And LED is ready to jump into the mix.
Not everything has to be a gut-wrenching, serious experience that we live every day. We need an outlet that venues like this provide, just to come and have a good time and relax and watch people that love what they do.
It's a reminder of the sanctity of art and artists, that there's immense value in the act of sharing art, and this becomes a house for that and a reminder of how important it is.
LED, we're told, has raised about $800,000 of the $2 million they need to complete this renovation, which will include a 150-seat theater. The rest, they hope, will come from donations, with a goal to be up and running and dancing by early 2025. Hundreds of members of Congress, as well as dozens of attorneys general, have joined forces to keep a freeze on the enforcement of Idaho's strict abortion ban. And with freezing temperatures in the forecast, ACHD is already getting ready for its winter conditions. Here's Jude Binkley with the 411 from around the 208.
On Monday, more than 250 members of Congress submitted court documents to try to protect access to emergency abortion care in Idaho. An amicus brief was filed in 2 cases, United States versus Idaho and Moyle versus United States. The brief urges the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit to uphold a lower court's preliminary injunction blocking Idaho's abortion ban. It argues Idaho's abortion law violates EMTALA, or the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which requires hospitals that accept Medicare to provide emergency treatment, including abortions, when necessary. And then today, 24 attorneys general across the country, including New York AG Letitia James, filed another amicus brief for the same thing. The brief also urges the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit to uphold a lower court's preliminary injunction blocking Idaho's abortion ban. It says letting Idaho override EMTALA will cause pregnant people to suffer irreversible injuries or die. A man was arrested last night after a standoff with police in northwest Boise that lasted 4 hours. Boise police say officers responded to reports of a suspected drunk driver who hit a parked car, and when they got there, the suspect ran off and broke into a vacant home. Crisis negotiators spent the next several hours trying to get him to come out until officers went in and found him in the crawl space. The suspect was arrested, police say, without incident. We've already seen snow in higher elevations. Now, down in the valleys, the Ada County Highway District is prepping for winter. ACHD says they have more than 175 team members which are undergoing training programs this week. They also have 73 units, 50 of them with mounted snowplows, ready to help with the snow this winter, as well as on-call contractors for major weather events. And that's the 411 for the 208. I'm Jude Binkley.
I think about the sports teams sprinkled about Boise and their respective representative mascots. You got Humphrey the Hawk, maybe came to mind, possibly. He's the mascot of the Boise Hawks, the baseball team. Buster Bronco, the furry face of the Boise State Broncos. Are you familiar with Tucker, the mascot of the Idaho Horsemen, which you might think would be a cowboy, not a horse, but it's a horse. And of course, hockey fans know Blue the Bear, the mascot of who else but the Idaho Steelheads. Look, I didn't say they all made sense, but they are all caricatures of creatures you can find in Idaho. But back in the day, there was one animal that represented the city of trees, a flightless bird that drew flocks of visitors. Not because he was cute and cuddly, though, which may have been part of his pizzazz.
Fighting Bob's sort of a, what I want to say, historical part of Boise's early history.
Just off Warm Springs Avenue in East Boise.
There used to be a very grand building called the Natatorium, a big ornate indoor pool, and next door was an amusement park.
It was known as White City Park, named after the Columbian Exposition at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, where a majority of the buildings were painted white.
It was just an outdoor space with games and live entertainment and some animal attractions.
Including 2 ostriches.
Their names were Fighting Bob and Desdemona.
Because of his behavior, he got the nickname Fighting Bob. And that was apparently named after a boxer, a real famous boxer at that time that was known as Bob Fitzsimmons.
He was really feisty with visitors and with his partner Desdemona. He had a reputation for snapping at fingers, sneaking up on visitors and trying to take a bite or a kick out of them. The intent was for these 2 ostriches to mate and produce a lot of eggs. They never did. Instead, they fought.
And Desdemona ultimately died. Bob's mayhem didn't stop there.
Later on, at some point, Bob got out of his cage, got into the Boise River.
It sounds like a group of boys, teenagers, broke Bob out of his pen and attempted to ride him across the Boise River. I don't know how far they got or how they were caught, but it sounds like he went on an escapade around the city.
Despite his escape, Bob went back to White City, where he'd live for another 16 years.
Part of the attraction, not only is he's a big exotic bird, but people like to do things like feed him the butts of cigars or golf balls or give him tobacco and ice cream, all these certain things that you don't want to give to an ostrich normally. That was part of the attraction.
Fighting Bob died in 1927.
He was such a popular attraction that his owners wanted, I think, to maintain his popularity, and they had him taxidermied.
Nearly 100 years after his death, Fighting Bob now lives in Caldwell at the Orma Smith Museum of Natural History on the campus of the College of Idaho. But his story does not stop there.
We knew about Fighting Bob as a historic figure in our town and thought about reimagining him going on adventures throughout Boise. So the idea originated in 2017. Our department for some time has been looking for ways to engage youth and families and educators, and things like children's books are really incredible ways to do that.
So Fighting Bob became a series of children's books, written and illustrated by Caitlin Hocklander.
And really, in many ways, it was her idea, and we let her fly. Even though ostriches don't fly.
In them, historical photos mixed with stories about Fighting Bob's big adventures around Boise.
So Fighting Bob moves to Boise. He goes to the Boise Fire Department. He goes to the Boise pools. He goes to the airport. The depot, the Boise Depot. So we hope that by sharing some of Boise's unique municipal stories, that people can learn more about their hometown.
That's a cool way to learn about history, but no word yet on where Bob is going to go next in his stories. But you can check out the books at the Boise Public Library, and if you're interested in visiting the actual Fighting Bob, the stuffed one, by the way, Orma J. Smith Museum of Natural History on the C of I campus, that is open to the public.
That is a fantastic dose of color that we have outside, because the current picture looking not so colorful. It's a little dreary as we continue to see some soggy conditions as a system bringing rain and high elevation mountain snow continues to move through the area. So this is what McCall looked like through the afternoon hours. You can see several showers passing through there, including pretty close to right now, 37 degrees there, though this is still mainly falling as rain. Other roads in the area along Highway 55 are looking wet right now and not as snowy. But one thing that we've been able to notice in valley spots is the winds have picked up. These trees, the tops of the trees were moving a lot more just a couple minutes ago. You can see them rustling there. So the winds are starting to pick up in valley spots, really consistent wind speeds, which is probably more noticeable sometimes rather than wind gusts. Wind gusts don't last very long, wind speeds do. So consistently blowing around 24 miles an hour over in Boise. The winds are a little bit lighter in the Magic Valley, but that will continue to change as we go throughout the evening. They have some of the potential to see some of those stronger wind gusts because that's just where some of the components for the system line up a little bit more. So we do have a wind advisory in place, and that's because of the potential for those higher wind gusts. So you may see your Halloween decorations move around just a little bit. Good to keep an extra eye on them. And thankfully, a lot of this is starting now that we have a lot of the afternoon practices all wrapped up for the sports around the area. So you can see the moisture starting to filter through the area, and we've had a little bit more of the stronger showers at times, a little bit closer to Ontario and going towards the northeast of there. But all of that will continue to slide eastward, and we continue to see some of those chances of rain in the overnight hours, but it should taper off before the early morning hours. We should see a little bit of light snow piling up on some of those highest mountain peaks, but we do have a big cool down in store for tomorrow before those temperatures rebound on Friday.
All right, several comments today on impact fees, developer impact fees, and how they pertain to schools. Like this one from Bob. Not having the schools on the impact fee is just plain ridiculous. Without them being on the impact fee, you're going to keep having all these schools have to try levies to keep going. Yep, that's kind of the sentiment. My suggestion for the contractors to build new schools. This is from Peggy, by the way. She thinks the developers should build the new schools. They're buying up all the land and building all the houses. You could put all these parameters on developers, sure, but then they might choose to go elsewhere and develop houses someplace else. That's up to local cities. If the Idaho legislature would properly fund Idaho schools like our Idaho Constitution states, our property taxes would go down from lack of school bonds and levies, says Jerry. That's true. In 2005, the Idaho Supreme Court said, yes, the way that Idaho is funding schools is unconstitutional. Hasn't really changed much since then, though. What population level does Idaho have to reach in order to move from 2 to 3 representatives in the U.S. House? Well, we have to get that up. During the census, which was in 2020, it's based on that, we came this close. We were 8 out of 10 to get another representative in Congress. I believe Oregon got one, Montana got one, but there's only 435 allowed. So we get one, somebody's got to lose one. That's how it works. We'll see you tomorrow.
Continue with us and watch free now on the KTVB Plus app everywhere you stream.